Netflix just made the single most disruptive media move in professional golf's history, and the PGA Tour's television partners are scrambling right now to understand what it means for every contract they thought was secure. This is not a streaming deal for tournament highlights. This is not a behind-the-scenes access package that lives alongside existing broadcast rights. This is an $80 million exclusive documentary arrangement built around one player, the world number one, the most dominant active competitor in the sport, structured specifically to give Netflix unfiltered access to Scottie Scheffler's life, his competitive psychology, and his relationships inside the PGA Tour, in a way that no television partner currently holding tour broadcast rights is contractually permitted to touch. 62 current PGA Tour broadcast hours are now competing for audience attention against an $80 million streaming production built around the only player those broadcasts cannot get close to. And the Tour's media partners found out the same way everyone else did, when the announcement dropped publicly. Honestly, I think the Netflix-Scheffler deal just ended the PGA Tour's ability to control its own media narrative permanently, and the people in that boardroom have not yet understood the full scope of what they just lost. Does an $80 million Netflix documentary make Scheffler more valuable to professional golf? Or does it make the PGA Tour's existing broadcast partners irrelevant to the one story that actually moves ratings? Drop it in the comments right now. And if you want the inside story on what this deal actually means for every television relationship the PGA Tour thought it controlled, subscribe, because the broadcast landscape just changed, and it is not changing back. To understand why this Netflix deal is not just a media story, but a power story, you need to understand the specific architecture of the PGA Tour's broadcast relationships and why they are suddenly far more vulnerable than anyone has been willing to say publicly. The PGA Tour's current media rights deal, the framework that governs which networks get which tournaments, which streaming platforms get which content packages, and how the Tour's commercial television inventory is structured and sold, was negotiated during a period when the Tour's competitive content was understood to be a collective product, not a player-specific product, not a personality-driven product, a tournament product. The argument to broadcasters was always that the PGA Tour field was the attraction, that the week-to-week competitiveness of elite players across a full season schedule was what justified the rights fees being paid. That argument worked when no individual player's access could be cleanly separated from the Tour's collective broadcast package. Netflix just separated it. What the $80 million Scheffler deal does structurally, and this is the part the Tour's communications office has not addressed in any statement issued since the announcement, is create a parallel media universe around the sport's most valuable competitive asset that operates completely outside the Tour's broadcast rights framework. Netflix does not need the PGA Tour's permission to document Scheffler's life. They do not need access to the tournament broadcast feed. They do not need to negotiate with the Tour's media rights holders for the footage that makes Scheffler compelling to watch. They need Scheffler, and they got him for $80 million. The last time a single media deal restructured the commercial landscape of a professional sport this completely was in 2015 when Amazon signed a deal to stream NFL games. Not the biggest games, not the premium inventory, just Thursday Night Football. The sports media establishment called it a minor experiment. Within 4 years, Amazon's NFL streaming rights were worth over $1 billion, and every legacy broadcaster was renegotiating their NFL relationship from a position of structural weakness they had not anticipated. What Amazon did to the NFL in 2015 is what Netflix just did to the PGA Tour in a single afternoon. The Tour's broadcast partners are not panicking publicly, they are panicking privately, and the distinction between those two things is exactly where the story lives.
Scottie Scheffler is the 2024 Masters champion. 9 PGA Tour victories in a single season, ranked number 1 in the world for 18 consecutive months. He is not a player who courts media attention. He does not engineer publicity narratives. He does not give interviews designed to shape his public image in ways that serve commercial interests beyond his immediate competitive career. He is, by every observable measure, the most media-resistant dominant player professional golf has produced since Tiger Woods at his peak, which is exactly why what Netflix is paying $80 million for is not what most people assume. It is not the swing, it is not the wins, it is the access. The specific value proposition Netflix built this deal around, according to sources with knowledge of how the production structure was negotiated, is not tournament footage. The Tour's broadcast partners already have tournament footage. It is not press conference coverage. Every media outlet on the planet has press conference coverage of Scottie Scheffler. What Netflix is paying $80 million for is the off-camera Scheffler, the locker room Scheffler, the Scheffler who walks between his ball and his caddy during a final round, the Scheffler whose wife and family are present during tournament weeks, the Scheffler who has private conversations with other players that no broadcast camera has ever been close enough to capture. That is not a sports documentary. That is a portrait of professional golf's interior world, told from inside the most powerful vantage point in the sport. And the PGA Tour has absolutely no contractual mechanism to shape, edit, approve, or control what that portrait shows. Imagine being a PGA Tour media executive. Imagine spending 3 years rebuilding your broadcast relationships after the LIV Golf War destabilized every commercial conversation you were having. Imagine convincing your television partners that the tour's premium content, the signature events, the elevated fields, the concentrated star power, is worth the rights fees they are paying. Imagine building the commercial argument around the idea that the PGA Tour delivers elite professional golf in a package that no other entity can replicate. Now imagine the world number one signing an $80 million deal with a streaming platform that gives that platform access to the competitive reality your broadcast partners are paying for, without your involvement, without your approval, and without a single dollar of that $80 million passing through your organization. That is the specific situation the PGA Tour's media team walked into on the morning this announcement dropped. The question that has been sitting in every broadcast partner meeting since then is exactly what you would expect. If Netflix has unfiltered access to Scheffler, if Netflix can show audiences the real interior of competitive professional golf through the lens of the sport's most dominant player, what exactly are the tour's broadcast partners paying for? What does a tournament broadcast add to the audience experience that an $80 million Netflix production around the world number one does not? You built your broadcast relationship around the argument that the tournament is the product, that the PGA Tour brand, the event, the history, the competitive format is what drives the audience, that no individual player owns the commercial value of professional golf's weekly competition. You built your media rights deal around that argument. You paid for that argument. You structured your advertising inventory around that argument. And now $80 million just told your audience, and more importantly, your advertisers, that the product they are actually interested in is one person, one name, one competitive identity. Your argument just got a price tag, and the price tag is $80 million to access the one thing your broadcast deal does not include. Does the Netflix Scheffler deal expose the PGA Tour's broadcast model as fundamentally outdated because it proves audiences want player access, not tournament formats? Or does it make the Tour's existing broadcast rights more valuable because it generates the mainstream attention that drives people to watch live tournament golf? And the harder question, if you ran a PGA Tour broadcast rights negotiation tomorrow, how much is Scheffler's presence in the field actually worth versus every other player combined? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. What makes this deal more than a media business story is what it reveals about the specific relationship between individual player identity and institutional broadcast value in professional golf, a relationship the Tour has been managing very carefully for 30 years, and it reveals it at the worst possible moment.
The PGA Tour's relationship with its broadcast partners has never been transactional in the simple sense. It has been institutional. The networks that have carried PGA Tour golf, CBS, NBC, Golf Channel, have not just been buying content rights, they have been buying a relationship with an institution that has delivered consistent premium sports programming for decades and that has structured its commercial interests around protecting the value of that delivery. The unspoken promise inside that institutional relationship was always the same. The Tour controls the access. The Tour manages the narrative. The Tour determines what the broadcast audience sees and does not see about the interior life of professional golf. In exchange, the broadcast partners get a reliable premium sports product they can build advertising inventory around. That promise just broke, publicly, for $80 million. CBS has been the PGA Tour's primary broadcast partner for 54 years. 54 years of Masters coverage, 54 years of US Open access, 54 years of building the visual language that the global golf audience uses to understand the sport. Their most recent rights extension was negotiated under the assumption that the Tour's ability to control its own media environment to determine who gets access to what, when, under what conditions, was a stable, manageable institutional function. Netflix just demonstrated that assumption is no longer valid, and they demonstrated it by paying $80 million for the access CBS's 54-year relationship did not include. What the Tour's broadcast partners are now asking is not whether the Scheffler deal was legal or contractually sound. They know it was. What they are asking is why they were not given the opportunity to compete for what Netflix bought. Why the Tour's most commercially valuable individual asset, the world number one's unfiltered media access, was placed into a streaming deal without any conversation with the partners who have been building the commercial infrastructure around that asset for decades. The answer to that question is something the Tour has not publicly addressed, and the silence is the story. Here is the question that lives at the center of this entire situation. Is the PGA Tour a broadcast partner or a content supplier? Because those are not the same relationship. A broadcast partner has input into how the product is structured, who gets access to what, and how the commercial narrative is managed. A content supplier shows up with a tournament and lets the partners figure out what to do with it. The Tour has spent 30 years positioning itself as a broadcast partner, but the Netflix Scheffler deal was negotiated the way a content supplier behaves, independently, without consultation, without acknowledgement that the existing partner relationships have a stake in how the Tour's most valuable competitive asset manages its media footprint. Now here is the part nobody is talking about. The Netflix deal does not just compete with the Tour's broadcast partners for audience attention. It competes for the specific audience segment that the Tour's signature event framework was designed to capture, the casual sports fan who does not follow golf weekly but engages with premium sports narratives when they are told compellingly. The tour spent 3 years and significant structural energy building the signature event model around the argument that concentrating star power into fewer, bigger events would penetrate that casual sports fan demographic more effectively than the previous scattered schedule model. Netflix just bypassed that framework entirely. An $80 million documentary built around Scheffler does not need a signature event. It does not need an elevated field. It does not need a Thursday through Sunday broadcast window. It reaches the casual sports fan on a Tuesday night on a couch, directly, personally, with the most compelling access to the sports interior world that has ever been produced, without the tour's scheduling framework, without the tour's commercial mediation, and without a single viewing decision being driven by which tournament the tour decided to make a signature event this week. The tour built the stage, Netflix bought the star, and the audience follows the star. That sentence should terrify every executive in the PGA Tour's media relations division, because the signature event framework's commercial argument depended on the audience following the stage. It depended on the tournament brand driving the viewing decision. The tour built its entire post-live media strategy around that dependency. Netflix just ran an $80 million experiment to test whether that dependency is real or assumed. The results will be visible in the viewing numbers, and everyone involved knows which direction those numbers are going to point.
The last name you would expect to publicly defend the tour's position on the Netflix deal, to argue that an $80 million Scheffler documentary is ultimately good for the PGA Tour's institutional health, is Jon Rahm. Rahm left the PGA Tour for LIV Golf. He made his commercial priorities explicit and followed them. He is not a tour loyalist. He is not someone with a financial stake in the tour's broadcast relationships or its signature event commercial framework. Does the Netflix Scheffler deal ultimately grow the golf audience because it brings casual fans into the sport who then watch tournaments? Or does it cannibalize the tour's existing broadcast viewership by giving the most compelling access to a streaming platform that sits outside the tour's commercial infrastructure? And here is the real question. If you are a PGA Tour broadcast executive, do you try to block this deal or do you lean into it? Drop it below, right now. And yet Rahm, speaking through people familiar with his thinking on the broader golf media landscape, makes a case that the Netflix deal serves professional golf's long-term commercial health in ways the tour's institutional nervousness cannot see clearly right now. Rahm's argument is straightforward. The golf audience is not growing through tournament broadcasts. It has not grown meaningfully through tournament broadcasts for 15 years. The demographic accessing live tournament golf on CBS and NBC is aging, not expanding. The sport's next audience, the 25 to 40-year-old casual sports consumer who drives streaming economics, is not coming to professional golf through a Thursday afternoon broadcast on Golf Channel. They are coming through storytelling, through character access, through the kind of inside narrative that a Netflix documentary around the world #1 can deliver at a level no tournament broadcast format can match. Rahm is not wrong. The audience development logic is sound. But being right about the audience is not the same as being right about the institution. Because here is where even Rahm's coherent commercial logic cannot rescue the tour from what the Netflix deal actually did to its existing relationships. It is not about whether the documentary grows the golf audience. It is about the process. It is about the fact that the tour's most commercially valuable competitive asset entered an $80 million media arrangement that creates a parallel narrative universe around professional golf without the tour's institutional input, without its broadcast partners being informed in advance, and without any structural mechanism for the tour to benefit commercially from the audience growth the documentary generates. In 2017, the NFL's broadcast partners watched Amazon enter Thursday Night Football with a streaming deal that the league negotiated independently and announced publicly. The broadcast partners were assured the streaming deal was additive, that it would grow the audience, not fragmented. They were told the arrangement respected the existing rights structure. 4 years later, Amazon had exclusive Thursday Night Football rights, and CBS and NBC were renegotiating from a position they had not anticipated being in. The NFL told them it would be additive. It was, and then it became something else. The tour is telling its broadcast partners the Netflix deal is additive. They said the same thing 4 years ago about a different arrangement with a different streaming platform. The broadcast partners remember how that conversation ended. The US Open is 6 weeks away. The Netflix production team is already embedded, and the PGA Tour's broadcast partners are now preparing for the first major championship of the Netflix era, an event where the world #1 will be followed by a production crew with $80 million in backing, and an agreement that gives them access no tournament broadcast camera has ever had. That is not a hypothetical. That is the competitive environment of the next major championship. The most watched golf broadcast in the last 5 years was the 2023 Masters Sunday, the final round that produced Jon Rahm's victory. It drew 11.5 million viewers on CBS. The most watched Netflix sports documentary in the platform's history, Drive to Survive, the Formula One series, drew a global audience that Netflix's internal metrics placed over 100 million unique viewers across its first 3 seasons. Those are not comparable formats. They are not competing for the same viewing moment, but they are competing for the same person. The casual sports fan who makes the decision about which sports narrative to invest their emotional attention in, and 100 million is a number that 11.5 million cannot argue with in a sponsor meeting. What happens at the US Open is now the first real data point in a competition the tour did not choose to enter. The Netflix cameras will be there, the CBS cameras will be there, both will produce content built around Scheffler. The audience will vote with their attention, and the vote is not going to be close. Here is the question nobody in the tour's commercial division has answered publicly. If Netflix's Scheffler documentary generates 50 million viewers and the US Open broadcast generates 8 million, what does that ratio tell the tour's next broadcast rights ration partner about where the value actually lives? Because that negotiation is coming. The current rights structure has a renewal window, and the number sitting on the table when that window opens will have a Netflix data point attached to it that the tour cannot control, cannot reframe, and cannot negotiate away. 6 weeks, 1 major, 1 production crew with $80 million in full access to the world #1. The data is about to arrive.
Step back from the Netflix deal. Step back from the $80 million. Step back from the broadcast partner conversations and the signature event framework and the CBS 54-year relationship and the Amazon NFL comparison. Look at the pattern. Professional golf's media model has been built on a single foundational assumption for 30 years. The assumption is that the tournament is the product, that the PGA Tour's value to the media marketplace is a competitive event, a field of elite players competing across 4 rounds for a trophy, and that the individual players inside that event derive their media value from participation in the tournament product, not the other way around. That assumption has been challenged before. Tiger Woods challenged it in 1996, and the tour absorbed the challenge because Tiger's commercial dominance drove tournament viewership simultaneously. The individual story and the institutional product grew together. This is different. You have been watching professional golf on CBS, on NBC, on Golf Channel for 20 years. You have watched the broadcast model deliver the game, beautifully, professionally, with production values that have defined how sports television covers outdoor competition. You have watched the tournament become the frame through which the player is understood. And now $80 million just told you the frame is wrong. The player is not understood through the tournament is understood through the player. And the platform that paid $80 million for that understanding is not sharing it with the broadcast infrastructure you have been watching for 20 years. The product you have been given is the tournament. The product that exists is Scottie Scheffler. Those are not the same thing anymore. The suits build a broadcast model. Netflix bought the sport. This is not about streaming versus linear television. That conversation is 20 years old, and everyone in sports media has been having it since ESPN launched its first streaming product. This is about something more fundamental, whether professional golf's media value is institutional or individual, whether the PGA Tour sells a competition or sells access to competitors, whether the broadcast partners paying rights fees are buying a product that the tour controls or a product that lives inside the players themselves, a product the tour can influence, can schedule around, can manage the logistics of, but ultimately cannot own. Netflix just answered that question with $80 million in public. Is the Netflix-Scheffler deal the moment professional golf's media model permanently shifted from institutional to individual, from tournament product to player product? Or is this a one-time arrangement that the PGA Tour can absorb without structural consequence to its broadcast relationships? Drop your answer right now, because the tour's next broadcast rights negotiation will be the verdict, and that negotiation is closer than most people realize. The assumption is broken. The data is coming, and the tour has very little time to build a response that doesn't begin with pretending the assumption was always wrong. Here is what happens next. The Netflix documentary drops. The viewing numbers come in. The tour's broadcast partners open their spreadsheets, look at the data, and start the conversation they have been delaying since the announcement dropped, about what the tour's media rights are actually worth in an environment where the most compelling professional golf content is not produced through the tour's broadcast infrastructure. That conversation has one outcome that the tour can manage, and one outcome it cannot. The manageable outcome is that the documentary grows the golf audience, and the broadcast viewership rises with it. The unmanageable outcome is that the documentary demonstrates, with real numbers, that the audience of professional golf's interior world is 10 times the audience for professional golf's tournament broadcast, and that the entity capturing that larger audience is not the PGA Tour. One of those outcomes changes everything, and the tour cannot control which one arrives. If you want the inside story on how the PGA Tour's broadcast partners are actually responding to this deal behind closed doors, and what the next rights negotiation looks like when Netflix data is sitting on the table, subscribe, because the commercial earthquake that just happened has aftershocks that have not arrived yet. This is not a media story. This is a power story, and power stories do not end with a press release.